crowd. We've got 34 folks in the waiting room. Really looking forward to this. Our panelists, Shrita, Maya, Jen Rose, Amin, are folks ready to jump right in?
Yes.
All right.
Do you want me to leave a message in there?
Okay, good morning, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you. As folks are connecting to audio and video, we'll give folks just a moment to get situated. It's great to see you. We're so excited for today's event, Data-Informed, Equity-Driven, Cultivating a Collaborative Data Culture. Some really exciting colleagues who you'll be hearing from very shortly. So we're going to click record and get started. So an official good morning and welcome to Data-Informed, Equity-Driven, Cultivating a Collaborative Data Culture. My name is Dan Ferris. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Associate Director for Training and Education at the Social Policy Institute. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to be kicking us off this morning and to be getting us started in our next offering of our learning event series for data science for social impact here at the Social Policy Institute. So this initiative is really grounded in looking to develop trainings and resources, create community and connection, specifically for the St. Louis social sector, but also open to all for organizations seeking to utilize data more effectively to increase impact and promote equitable outcomes. Quick housekeeping note, as you'll notice, we are using Zoom meeting today very deliberately and not Zoom webinar because we do look forward to this being a conversation. During the pre-event chat, we were already talking about some opportunities for some poll questions, for some engagement in the chat. I hope folks had an extra cup of coffee this morning and are ready to get going. So as we're moving forward, we'll just want to highlight and thank our advisory committee for this initiative, representing an incredible number of local, regional, and national experts and leaders in data science in the social sector, in grounding our work in community and equity. So a very special shout out and thank you to this incredible group of folks, as well as to our group of presenters who you will be meeting soon today. This advisory committee really helped us to establish a set of guiding principles, values, and vision for this initiative. In partnership with the advisory committee, this set of ideas are both implemented and applied throughout everything that we're doing with the data science for social impact work. And hopefully folks are seeing this brought to life and applied in the very event space that we're sharing this morning. Most notably, we are committed to these offerings being freely available and accessible to a wide range of social sector professionals, folks interested in the area, and of course, looking to meet participants where they are on their data journey. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Helping to guide some of this work and our intentionality around making sure that we're incorporating participant and social sector feedback is our efforts and interest in obviously hearing from you. So both during the event today, we're looking forward to hearing from you. And then also we're going to be, of course, circulating afterwards, as well as putting a link in the chat to a post-event survey. Whether you are here for 15 minutes, the full hour and a half, or you're already signed off because something else has come up in your inbox, we do very much want to hear from you and hear how these offerings are meeting you where you are and helping to support you, your organization, and your journeys in grappling around centering equity and community in data. And so speaking of, as you've registered for this event, you'll know this as well as we do, we always like to share back just to give a sense for who's in the room. So folks here this morning, close to 50-50 folks who data informs their work, but is not their primary focus. And a number of folks who working with data is their primary focus. We also welcome the 8% of registrants who say they have little or no interaction with data, but are just very excited to hear from our speakers and to be engaged in this community. Most folks are working in or with nonprofit or government. And then the geography, of course, great representation from St. Louis. And then we're also welcoming our friends, colleagues, family, even from beyond the St. Louis region. A quick plug, while we've got everyone just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for this morning. So the next event in our series, registration is open and live for sharing data, sharing power, tools, intentions, and collective data efforts. Coming up in mid-June, and we would love to continue the conversation with folks then. Also, we'd be remiss not to mention an incredible open classroom series that we're so happy to be co-sponsoring here at the Brown School, an artificial intelligence and the social sciences. So a bit different of a lens, but some really terrific overlaps for folks who are interested in this area. Professor Rupong An will be leading a session coming up on May 12th on AI, implications for social equity and bias. Hope we're not throwing too many events and opportunities at folks, but since you're here, we figured we'd just give it a humble plug and look forward to seeing folks across these spaces. As we are moving rapidly into the content that folks came here today, we wanted just to recenter and share this visual of a curriculum that we've been working on and developing that's really helped to guide these learning events and offerings and help to compartmentalize this area of data science for social impact and specifically for the social sector. At the very beginning of this initiative and our work, we did a pretty robust scan of training opportunities and learning opportunities around data science for social impact. And we found overwhelmingly that most of the materials and offerings and resources were more technically focused and not really tailored for the social sector audience, both consumption and then connection and application around. And so the focus areas that we've developed with consultation and collaboration with our advisory committee and so many in the field, and as we're working our way through these learning events, assess, collaborate, cultivate, build, improve, engage, we feel are foundational and central to effective, efficient, and most importantly, equitable data practice, strategy, and organizational culture. So to talk us through and to help to introduce today's theme and overarching umbrella of Cultivate, I'm going to turn things over to my amazing colleague, Jen Rose Fitzgerald. Wish Jen Rose a happy May the 4th be with you day in honor of the date on the calendar, and looking forward to the event to come. Thanks so much, Jen Rose and all.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking us through those focus areas. As mentioned, we developed those with feedback from a lot of different folks here in St. Louis and beyond. And each month we're holding an event zeroing in on one of these focus areas. So today, that is Cultivate a Data-Informed Culture. What does it mean to cultivate a data-informed culture? Obviously, being more fluent and intentional with data is a part of this. So this involves asking questions like, how is your organization using data? How does the data actually help you inform your programs or help you assess the impact that you're having? And also how to staff within different roles in your organization, say data analysts, frontline staff, executive leadership, communicate about data. So that is an important piece. And also, as Dan mentioned, in keeping with our values, this means cultivating a culture that values collaboration beyond your organization with those who are clients or those who are impacted by your programs, engagement and equity. So we are looking at approaching data according to those values. So this involves asking questions like, are you asking equity related questions of your data and with your data? Does your organization have shared values around the importance of equity and engaging community? And how are you capturing the voices and perspectives of clients or people who are represented in your data or served by your programs? Questions like these. And an even bigger question, how are you collaborating and engaging with other organizations to figure out how you can work together to better serve clients and ultimately promote more equitable outcomes in your field? So these are really big questions, and we certainly do not have all the answers, but our speakers today spent a lot of time thinking about these things, and I know a lot of you all do as well. So just a quick overview of how today will go. We have first some amazing presenters will share their experiences with building a collaborative data culture in places where they have worked. And then we will also along the way pose a couple of questions to you about how you are grappling with these things in your work. And after that, we'll hear from two local organizations who will share some of their experiences building collaborative data practices here in St. Louis, particularly around education. And at the end, then we will open it up to a larger discussion where you will be invited to share some of your thoughts and insights and strategies with one another. So that's what we're here to do. And with that, I'll get the ball rolling and introduce our first speaker, Amin-Ra Mashariki. Amin-Ra Mashariki is a man who wears many hats. He is a valued member of our DSSI Advisory Committee. He currently serves as Data and Social Justice Fellow at Bezos Earth Fund, where he works to identify strategies to help environmental justice organizations use data to solve complex issues. And among the many other hats he wears and has worn, he served as the first Chief Analytics Officer for the City of New York, where he developed innovative strategies for fostering multi-agency collaboration around data. And there are numerous other positions and roles that have informed his thinking about today's topic, about what it means to have a robust data culture. So please join me in welcoming Amin-Ra Mashariki.
Thank you so much, Jem Rose, and thank you, Dan. And it's a pleasure to sort of engage this group with this really impressive group of panelists and colleagues. So let me start, because I've got 15 minutes. Let me hop to it. I'm going to share my screen. Jem Rose, can you confirm that we can see this? Awesome. Thank you so much. So I really want to, the theme of my discussion is around the fact that a collaborative data culture, and specifically a culture, is defined in the doing, not the documenting or discussing. I think the documenting and discussing is certainly a part of it, but really driving through doing and learning is the theme of my conversation. And so the way I think about this is, when you think about a larger culture, you think about what are the pieces that contribute to that culture. And so for the sake of this conversation, I pulled out 3 pieces that I wanted to talk to this group about and share some insight. So the first one is identify, accept, and learn from failure. And I've played many roles in private sector, leading AI teams. And, you know, in the startup world, they always say, you know, fail fast. And people always talk about failure is good and so on and so forth. But then when you dig in and you're like, yeah, but fail how? Because we know some people get fired for failing. So that's not the failure that you're talking about, right? And people, it's really difficult for people to put their finger on what's meant by that. And again, going with the theme of this conversation, really, no one knows until you actually execute and you do, right? And so an example of that, so there's this really amazing book that I've had since my time really early on when I worked at Motorola. So I was a lowly software engineer right out of college at Motorola, and I worked in Motorola Labs, which was the R&D arm of Motorola. And we really followed almost as a Bible of sorts, our true north, if you will, this book by Henry Petrosky. It's called To Engineer is Human, The Role of Failure in Successful Design, right? And it's an amazing book. And we really followed that as our true north. The book really just talks about historically all of these instances of failure in engineering design and catastrophic failure oftentimes. And how did we, especially in terms of development of infrastructure, bridges, walkways, and so on and so forth, and how did we learn from those failures to get to a place where we've really built some powerful and amazing infrastructure, examples of infrastructure, right? And so it's not so much in pontificating and envisioning what that failure is. It's actually in the doing you identify the failures that you learn from. Second is on the ground truthing. And on the ground truthing is essentially the data tells us one thing. How do we then figure out if what the data is telling us actually makes sense on the ground? And I'll tell a quick story from when I was Chief Analytics Officer for the City of New York. As many of you well know, New York City has a rodent challenge, to put it mildly. And de Blasio was the mayor at the time, and they asked my team. And so I ran the mayor's office for data and analytics. It was a team of about nine or so data scientists. And so they asked my team to do an analysis of 311 data and pest sightings across New York City to understand where these were happening and do some sort of leading indicator analysis and so on and so forth, so that we can begin to put some policy together. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in project houses in Brooklyn, New York, low-income project houses. And whenever I did analysis as the chief analytics officer, I always checked in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I actually still lived in that neighborhood at the time, but not in the project home, but still lived in the neighborhood. So I always check in the neighborhood. And we did this analysis of rodent sightings, and there was almost none in the project homes that I lived in. And we were using New York City's 311 data, which is non-emergency sort of call-in data. And so I still had friends, and I knew a lot of folks that actually worked there. So I went to the facilities head literally later that evening, and I said, so there's no rodent issue? Because I knew growing up here, there was tons of rats all the time, right? So you guys got rid of that? It was like, no, it's actually probably worse than it was when you were here, Amin. It's like, that's interesting, because the 311 data that my team has been looking at says that there's no issue here. You know what his response was? His response was, well, what's 311 data, right? And then through engaging some of the occupants of those houses, a lot of people didn't know about 311 data. A lot of people were concerned that sharing data, sort of calling into 311 and submitting information about rodent sightings was just useless, because, hey, I've been telling the head of facilities for years about rodents. Now you're telling me to go onto a website to submit it to who knows what, who's going to then send it to the head of facilities. Like, that's ridiculous, right? And so there were all these reasons: access to technology, use of technology, all these reasons why people from that community were not submitting these rodent sightings, right? And so clearly at that point, I understood that our analysis just from 311 data did not jive with things that were happening in the community. And so there always has to be, and then we shifted our strategy for doing this analysis for the mayor, and quite effectively too. But what was key was we had to build on the ground truthing mechanisms. And that's a culture, because there are times when you don't know how to do on the ground truthing. You don't have the time to do on the ground truthing. And it may actually be more cumbersome than not doing it. But building that into the culture of your collaborative data environment is going to be key for success, right? Then the next one is lead with domain expertise, not with data. And this one is also a key component of the culture that you should build to ensure collaborative work. So again, another example is, so I got called in post my time in New York City during COVID. The city was really trying to work through sort of overcrowding in shelters. And so they were coming up with mechanisms with which to get people out of the shelter, giving them vouchers and so on and so forth to get access to rooms. It's called single room occupancies and so on and so forth, to move them out of the shelter so you can make space and do all sorts of things with that space to facilitate people, because New York City is one of the, I think New York City and DC, maybe there's other cities that are a right to housing city. And so they had hired this fancy, and many of you may know, fancy consulting firm to do this analysis of how to get people who are in the shelters to take these vouchers to get moved into these single room occupancies. And it just wasn't working. So this consulting firm was brought in to figure out, well, why weren't people taking these free vouchers to get these single room occupancies? So then they brought me in and said, Amin, can you help make heads or tails of this data? And this consulting firm, I mean, really smart data people and broke down all of the data science methods they were using and analysis they were using. And it's all this amazing data they had and it was using. And they were like, the data is just telling us that nobody wants to take these vouchers. So I happen to have an older brother who runs the shelters in New York City are privatized. And so he runs housing. My dad founded a nonprofit in New York City called Black Veterans for Social Justice. And my brother was the head of housing. So and they had oversight over, I think, 7 or 8 shelters. So I reached out to him. I said, Jelani, look, what's going on here? Can I come down to one of the shelters and talk to some of the folks? He said, sure, but I can tell you right now, but come on down. So here's what the issue was. The issue was, one, at shelters, they offer 3 hots and a cot, right? What they refer to as 3 hots and a cot. If you move to a single room occupancy, the cost of food is now on you, right? And so there were people who chose, I would rather have food and shelter at this shelter than move out to the shelter. And I don't have the right employment and I can't afford food in some of these neighborhoods. So I'd rather stay here. That's one. 2, he said, look, it's easier for people to get the vouchers if they just moved into the shelter, like yesterday or 2 days ago, right? But if they've been in the shelter for weeks, they've built a sense of community in that area, access to school. Maybe their kids go to schools in the area, resources, friends, so on and so forth, and they're less likely to go, to leave. 3rd is some of the best vouchers in some of the better neighborhoods in New York City, Brooklyn, Manhattan, so on and so forth, are gone. And you're offering vouchers to like Staten Island. No offense to Staten Island, if anyone on this call lives in Staten Island, but it's like, if you're at a shelter in Brooklyn, you will not be likely to want to move to an SRO in Staten Island. There's this concept that somehow, quote unquote, beggars can't be choosy, right? But there are people who are like, hey, there's nothing for me in Staten Island. I'd rather stay here. And again, talking to the social workers and talking to the domain experts, which were the clients themselves at these shelters, that helped us understand and dig into the data a bit more and be more thoughtful, right? And so that consulting firm did not have leading with domain expertise as part of their culture. And so again, it's about building these things in and making this a part of your culture. You can do them one-off, maybe you do them a couple of times, that's fine, but ultimately weaving these concepts and many, many more. This is not the exhaustive list, of course. Many more things are going to be key. Another thing about being collaborative with data is about understanding quality of data, right? Because how you share, how you talk about, how you think about data is really sort of encompassed in quality. And I use this, I know you're like, what is this guy doing with these bananas? So essentially, the banana on the left, my son loves bananas. The banana on the left is the type of banana that he will accept from me. The banana on the right, he will turn his nose up to every single time. So for him, the banana on the left is a good quality banana. The banana on the right is not. But I'm an avid runner. I run most days out of the week. The banana on the right is the banana that I love because I put it in the freezer at the point where it gets spotty like this. I put it in the freezer, freeze it. So when I make my shakes, when I come in from my run, this with peanut butter and oat milk is amazing. It's actually the perfect type of shake that I would make. So for me, this is a high quality banana, the banana on the right with the spots. And so determining the quality of data, people always try to sort of identify, well, we need to have good quality data. You don't know the quality of the data unless and until you use it in many different scenarios. The quality of the data is defined by how it's used and who uses it, right? And so again, collaboration and use is key to identifying quality, and quality is key to identifying appropriate execution, which is key to identifying impact, right? So quality in using data and the use of data. People like to point to data sets and say, that's a high quality data set. That's not a high quality data set. That's just not a real thing from my perspective. Many people will tell you different. You can kind of label data sets quality or not quality, but it's how you use it and when it's used and where it's used. Next, let's talk about quantifying bias, right? People don't talk about it. We're talking about equity. Equity is about quantifying bias. I put this together. You can create the questions you ask and quantify bias based on the things that are important to you. And I just put examples here, right? You can do plus or minus 2 points to a data set if you know who collected it, plus or minus 4 points if you know why they collected that data set, plus or minus 2 points on why you're using it, right? If it's a good reason, bad reason, plus or minus on how many years this data has been collected consistently. There might be missing years across a decade, 3 years where it just wasn't collected. Plus or minus points on have there been any negative articles published about this data, right? And so on and so forth. And you can actually come up with a numerical number that lets you feel comfortable about the type of bias you're introducing into the data set by using it. And then that lets you then understand the use of this data from an equity standpoint, right? So I created this in about a half an hour, right? And so as a team, you can sit around and think through the bias questions, the questions that would give you some sense of bias, right? Do we have data provenance? Do we actually know the history of this data set? There's a quote that I like that I always use. It says, data are like waves. You never know when they began, right? Let me just quickly finish out. I think I have, yeah. So how do we do this? And I said, building a culture is about in the doing. In New York City, I instituted this thing when I was the chief analytics officer. I instituted this thing called data drills. And what it was I instituted a policy where the data heads of each agency, we would meet monthly and we would gather around a scenario and we would try to solve that scenario. And it was a real world scenario. We would try to solve that scenario over the course of 2 days. And what it forced us to do was begin to think about how to share data. Who do we share data with? When do we share data? What sort of privacy concerns do we have about this data in sharing? And we would do that monthly, and it would test our ability over many different things to be collaborative. The reason why I did that was because when I came into office, it was the year after the Sandy storm, and the Bloomberg administration did an after action report that basically said, New York City doesn't know what's going on with its data, don't know how to share it, don't know how to engage. I mean, it was just a terrible, and normally if I was doing this presentation with a different group, I would probably use a couple of curse words here, but it was just a bad situation for data. And so I implemented these data drills, right? And so the data drills existed around scenarios. We would create these real world scenarios. So I'm gonna give you a quick example. I'm just take a couple of seconds to give you a quick example. So here's a data drill scenario, right? You've been, as an organization, you've been funded by the city of Baltimore to help identify where many children under the ages of 15, and I just created this scenario like last night, under the ages of 15 are most likely to be suffering from respiratory issues and are developing chronic asthma symptoms, right? And so you put together this sort of heat map of air quality counts, which is at the high level, sort of the census tract level. You're not even getting into the block. You're certainly not getting any more granular than that, but at the census tract level. Then you have this statewide view in Maryland of asthma emergency room discharges by zip code, right? So you've got this interesting information and you bring it together and then you give this report to the mayor and you say, hey, here's where in the city of Baltimore, we think things are really dicey, right? So now here's where, so one, there's a lot of questions around doing a data drill and getting that data and using that data and feeling comfortable about these data sets and these proxy data sets, right? So the data drill will force a conversation, sharing with how do we get this data? How do we get emergency room discharge data and make sure we're not breaking HIPAA protocols, so on and so forth. Now, here's the second part of the data drill. So your organization developed a high-level view of air quality and asthma emergency visits. The mayor is concerned and declares a state of emergency health emergency. He asked the federal government for $5 million to get asthma pumps and other medical resources in the hands of Baltimoreans ASAP, right? Asked the federal government for $5 million, gets $100,000, right? which is usually how that goes. So now the mayor tasks your organization with maximizing this money to equitably distribute asthma pumps to everyone in need in the city of Baltimore over the course of a week, right? So then the question becomes, so you've got all this high-level granular data. How do you actually operationalize data such that you can get these resources into the hands of Baltimoreans, right? The question now becomes, what data can you use? Are you breaking, is there ethical reasons why you shouldn't use that data? Does this data allow for you to focus on the community such that it's an equitable operation? Because oftentimes we know some of our most underserved and challenged communities, we don't share data about ourselves, so the government doesn't know anything about us. So therefore, whatever data you might have might be in more of the higher income communities. And so now you're handing out asthma pumps there, but missing other communities, right? So you spend the 100K, but was it equitable? And so having a data drill, ask and create tons of questions are really key. Last slide is, here's sort of how we would put these data drills together. We would have, and there's a whole package of content we would put together before we executed a data drill. And I mean, folks from the mayor's office, deputy mayors would be involved in these data drills. I mean, we had one time like 110 people in one data drill across the city agencies, right? So they get fairly extensive. Exercise name, exercise sponsors, the dates for the exercise objectives, the mission, target capabilities, scenario type, exercise planning team. It would be very involved. And so this is just a view of how we would put these data drills, and we would do them monthly such that we could grow the nature of data collaboration and the culture of data collaboration across a relatively large city. Thank you. Let me stop sharing here.
Thank you so much, Amin. That was great. And Dan, if you want to share the other slide. This concept of data drills is really great. And I just want to pose a question to the group, which is thinking about this idea of collaborating with data across organizations on some sort of big picture data challenge or opportunity. If you just think for a minute about your organization and partners that you work with, if you could convene organizational partners to collaborate around any challenge or opportunity around data, what would it be? And an example, equity decision making around emergency housing access. There's a link to a Padlet in the chat where you could put some of your ideas or some things that you might choose to do. Someone said in the chat, I would love to see an example of a data drill packet or any other information about how to set these up. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is something we are working with Amin on to, that's something that we're working with Amin to create as a part of our Data Science for Social Impact initiative. So you can be looking for that in the future. So just take a few minutes and go over to the Padlet.
Just in case there are folks who aren't familiar with the platform, in the bottom right-hand corner is at least on my screen, a bright pink plus button. And so if you click on the plus button in the bottom right-hand corner, that'll allow you to contribute to the Padlet. Thanks for your input and your feedback here.
And just a couple of things coming in. How do we define equitable outcomes around across St. Louis school districts? Great question. Measuring and showing the impact of the arts on our community. How do we report on data for St. Louis City and County when they don't align? All of these would be great questions to ask, to convene partners and ask. So for those who are sharing ideas, thank you. Hold on to your ideas, because there will be some time later where you can share some of these with each other. And just, we hope you'll go away thinking about this. How would you collaborate with data with some of your partner organizations? A data drill is one tool that you can use to collaborate around data, and that's really suited to working across organizations. As many of you know, even collaborating within your own organization around data can be a challenge. So before we move to our next speaker, I want to do a quick poll. Thinking about your organization, is working with data something that primarily happens among data people, or do staff from different roles within the organization actively participate in conversations about data in a meaningful way? So are there conversations about what data to collect or how to interpret data, or whether you're asking the right questions of your data, something that happens across roles or departments? I'm just going to take an actual poll. Take a minute to weigh in. People are already starting to weigh in. Staff in my organization work collaboratively with data across roles. A fair number of people starting to. Really interesting. You all are experts. Experts at weighing in. We have 80% participation right now. Get it just a little bit higher. And then we will end the poll and display your answers. All right. So it looks like a mix. 10% strongly agree, 39% agree, 27% disagree, 4% strongly disagree, and 19% just not sure. So that's really great information. Thank you all for sharing. Our next presenter has spent a lot of time thinking about this question and has had the opportunity to think about it from a couple of different angles. So Senna Dawes is currently a research analyst with Feeding America, working primarily in the research translation space in food insecurity research. So she's currently in a large organization. She's currently in a large organization with a research team, an analytics team, plenty of data people around. Prior to her current position, Senna was the manager of evaluation for the Missouri Historical Society, and that was the first internal evaluator that the society hired. So she knows what it means to be the only data person in the building as well, and has experience building evaluation departments from the ground up and supporting non-evaluators in integrating evaluation into their work. So to talk a little bit more about that, please join me in welcoming Senna Dawes.
Great. Thank you, Jen Rose, for that. Let me. Okay. Jen Rose, can you let me know if my screen is visible? It's all good. Okay, great. So good morning or afternoon or wherever you are. I just wanted to talk today a little bit about building a collaborative data culture. As Jen Rose mentioned, I've come from both sides of things, from being in a place with starting somewhere with very little to no data culture to now working somewhere where there's already a very established collaborative culture around data. And so I just wanted to share some of my experiences with in both situations. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is about collaboration and communication around data across an organization. Currently, I work on a very large team, a research team, and I specifically am part of a 2-person sub-team where we are essentially the ones in charge of sharing our data with other departments within our organization, as well as our network of around 200 food banks. So quick background, Feeding America is a large national organization, and I like to think of it as essentially like a professional organization that just does a lot of things for their audience, which in this case are different food banks and pantries. So we provide training, grant funding, government advocacy, research, just a lot of different things for food banks all over the country. And so a lot of my work revolves around sharing data and research around food insecurity. So as you can imagine, working with a large organization like Feeding America, as well as with food banks all over the country who are located in different places, have different needs, all that stuff, it can be quite an ordeal in getting people access to the correct data and getting it to them when they need it. One thing we're currently doing, myself and my manager on our sub team, we're working on a very basic concept that we're calling our stat library. We've recently started doing analysis and compiling data around a lot of new topics, especially around equity. So we have been working really hard to provide the network and the organization with data surrounding racial, like how food insecurity affects different racial groups, also around, different population groups like LGBT groups or those of different citizenship status, just a wide variety of topics. And so we are currently trying to work with departments across the organization and understanding the type of data that they need to help convey messaging, and working with individual food banks and what stats they use often, where it is being used, and when they use it. Like currently we're in the middle of providing a lot of information to prepare for the various months ahead. There's Pride Month next month, Juneteenth is next month. This month is senior, it's senior, I can't remember exactly what the name is, but it's around senior hunger is happening this month. There's a lot, immigrant Heritage Month is next month. So we are currently working on trying to help all teams across the organization gather and provide information that they can use to help talk about food insecurity in these spaces. So it is definitely like building a plane while flying it at the moment, with trying to keep up, especially because it's a large organization with people who know what kind of research they want and what kind of data they need. But we're hoping this helps alleviate a lot of the time that's spent, just trying to work individually with other departments and other food banks and getting their information. So that's sort of one way that my team at Feeding America and working about sharing data across departments and organization that's really large and is already really comfortable with data. On the other hand, when I was at the Missouri History Museum, Missouri Historical Society, there was no data culture at all, let alone a collaborative one. Finding the right tools and methods, sort of what Amin was talking about earlier, it was a lot of difficult, it was a lot of trial and error, and it was mostly error. There was a lot of failing and trying to figure out what would work for this particular organization as far as collaborating across departments when these departments were not familiar with doing evaluation or utilizing research to in their work. I had explored doing data parties and data placemats, which is this is an example of a data placemat. I didn't even keep the one that I tried to use because it was just not good because I was looking for it for this presentation. But data parties are just this idea where, and some of you may be familiar with it, you as a analyst or researcher, you know, you're at the end of collecting something for a project and you bring just a raw form of the data to the stakeholders involved with the project to just start conversation around what trends you're seeing, how this answers some of the research questions and stuff like that. I was really excited about using these as a tool, but figured out pretty quickly that having these data parties and using data placemats was not going to work for an organization at the comfort level that they were at when it came to utilizing data and seeing relevance in it and being able to tie that relevance into their work. So even though the data party itself didn't work at that time, it was incredibly helpful in understanding the job that I was given and exactly the work that needed to be done to build that data culture across the org. So then it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years later that I tried a sort of data party again. It was more of a data gallery walk where I was doing a training on evaluation for all staff. And I invited everybody to look at different ways to present data, different ways to talk about data. So it wasn't until years later that this tool ended up being something that was actually useful for staff, because at that point they had a solid foundation as to what evaluation was. They could have seen how it's applicable to their own work. And we could have those conversations because we were all at a proper starting point for this particular tool. So love a data party. If I had stayed there longer, we probably would have gone more into it, but it was just one of those tools that you have to understand where your collaborators are at in order to make sure that it works best. The next thing I wanted to chat about is about a culture of engagement. So gathering feedback from those who, you know, in this case, it depends on how you define audience, but at the museum, it's our visitors. At Feeding America, it's really our food banks, but also the neighbors who visit our food banks, and how we gather feedback from those people, you know, about the programs that we provide. So at Feeding America, because of the nature of our organization, the people who we serve are our food banks. And in general, we do a really good job at involving food banks in every step. And I'm speaking specifically for our research team. I mean, there's a lot happening else in the rest of the organization, but I'm still relatively new and getting to know other departments. So within our research team, we do a lot of work around creating evaluation tools and providing research on different topics. A specific example of this is the evaluation team was working really closely with food banks, and I got to help conduct interviews with food banks around creating a toolkit for other food banks to use around having culturally specific foods available at food banks. So a lot of that was sitting and talking to food banks who had expressed that they had attempted this or it didn't work or how it is working, and really having them lead the collection of that information. So a lot of the work that our team does, it may start with our team coming in and saying, hey, how can we do something different in order to be useful to you all? But then it eventually turns into the food banks leading these sort of evaluation and research sort of initiatives, because they know best what they as a food bank need and also what their colleagues at other food banks might need. And so whenever we create new tools for the network, there are often multiple representations from other departments in the organization, as well as from food banks across the country, since they are our primary audience for all of the work that we do. In the museum, like on a smaller scale, my actual audience was really my colleagues for a long time. Obviously, as an evaluator, I communicate and interact frequently with our visitors, but in those early years, I was using my role as an evaluator to just get the visitor voice into the conversation being had by museum staff. As time went on, I started focusing more on bringing the visitors into those conversations themselves and not just their voice in the form of evaluation. So this approach is essentially what led to the last project I completed before I left the museum about 18 months ago, which was this exhibit, which if you're in St. Louis, you should go see it. It's up for the next 3 years or something. But it is an exhibit that invites people to come in and provide their feedback about the future of the museum as far as exhibits right now. And it was a great tool for visitors to feel included and get their voice heard, but also for my colleagues. It helps show some really tangible and applicable ways that the visitor feedback can be incorporated into their work. And it also keeps the visitors as front of mind and priority. It's a good reminder of these are the people who we are serving, and their voices should be really tied into the programs and exhibits and products that we are creating for our community, especially the St. Louis community, since it's a history museum that's so St. Louis focused. And so, there's so many ways to just sort of figure out how to get that feedback from your audience, but in a way that makes it really usable for yourself and your colleagues. So I always find that is one of the harder things with creating a collaborative data culture is finding that application. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is an organizational culture that centers equity. And this is one that, I think many people have been thinking a lot about over the last couple of years. And, for me, that idea of centering equity is, in my opinion, relatively new concept for many organizations. I feel like it's always been something that was talked about, but the centering part, I feel like, has been missing from many nonprofit, because that's where I have my experience, organizations. But I feel like, currently, and I can mostly only speak to Feeding America since I'm no longer at my old institution, but that idea of centering equity, especially on the research team, has definitely come in full force. And this was also something that when I was interviewing for positions, it was a question that I asked, and it's something I would encourage to ask of these organizations that you work with, like, how are you centering equity in the work that you are doing now? Because it's quite a process to really put that as a priority in your work. And so currently in the research department, centering racial equity has been something that has been prioritized, like, across the organization and especially in our department. And specifically a focus on the causes of food insecurity and not just about pounds distributed. And one example is this dashboard, which you could find on Tableau. It was a partnership we did with Tableau, and it's a dashboard that talks about identifying racism within the drivers of food insecurity. And so, when it comes to data and race, especially the data that we work with, which mostly comes from the Census Bureau or the USDA, it can be difficult to get the disaggregated and specific, in this case, racial data, in order to find out more about food insecurity, like on a national and local level. But the team has really prioritized figuring out how to get that information and how to provide it in a timely manner to the network. And this dashboard is one example. Myself and my team member are always working on writing like small papers just to get information to the network, because it's about just keep trying and keep doing. And the talking is good, but the doing is also helpful, even if it's not perfect the first time around, the second time around. But just working to show that we are trying to center this work in what we are doing by providing this information. Like, you'll find many of our annual studies now are able to break down food insecurity by a lot of different groups than they had in the past. This is all just coming out of a conscious effort that the organization and the department has as far as centering equity and asking these questions constantly and making this a regular part of how we do our work across the entire organization. So that is all I had, and I will pass it back to Jen Rose.
I couldn't tell if Jen Rose was smiling or frozen, but it looks like frozen. So as she's as she's logging back in, Sana, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your work, cutting across organizations and topic areas. The chat, it was already filling up with emoji applause, and I saw some real applause happening on the screen as well. And also putting in a couple of links to some of the resources and some of the examples that you were talking through. So thank you so very much for that. So as Jen Rose is getting back and reconnected, I will step in as your humble navigator and tour guide as we continue on this incredible journey through grappling with cultivating collaborative data community. I know one piece that we really wanted to do and talk about here and just give another chance for some engagement and for folks to share about their own organizations is another poll. So we are interested if your organization has used a data party, a data walk, some other similar tool to foster collaboration around data. So I will put that in the chat, or I will put that launching now, and give folks just a moment as you're reflecting on Sana's talk, on Amin's examples, to think about your organization and use of some of these concepts that we've started to introduce this morning. So folks chiming in across the three options. Election systems around the world would be thrilled to see the turnout and the response rates that we're getting in these polls. Thank you so much for your great contributions and participation. We'll give it just another moment and then we'll share the results. Okay, so what do we see? A number of folks reporting back that yes, indeed, they have used at their organization a data party, a data walk, or some similar tool to foster collaboration around data. Curious, as folks are thinking about and as we move towards the discussion, are those internally or externally facing? Are folks thinking about that, within their teams and within their colleagues? Are those with broader community and stakeholder members of the organization, to be sure? When we also think about the folks who say no, how are then your organization kind of centering different collaborative approaches to data? Or is this a representation of our earlier question, to be sure, of some of the folks who are saying their organization is less likely to be operating in some of these manners? And a number of folks just aren't sure, which I think there's a really interesting and important takeaway in and of itself there, as well as we're interpreting some of this on the fly. It's very possible that organizations are doing all kinds of things, but to Alman's earlier point and drawing back from what Sana was pointing to, also, sharing of information, disseminating information, there's a lot going on. And so sometimes things can get lost in the shuffle and mixed. So always a great thing. Thanks also for folks putting in the chat a couple of pieces as also. So we'll stop sharing this and jump right back into our agenda for the meeting. So now we're actually going to move things over to our social sector spotlight. So I know we've been looking forward to this very much looking forward to kind of bringing together both Maya as well as Sharita here. So Sharita Love is the founder and executive director for the Education Equity Center of St. Louis. Maya Elkana, the evaluation director for the Institute for School Partnership. I did notice when we were doing the Padlet activity earlier, a lot of education interest in the room today. So obviously the fan club of Maya and Sharita is here today. And we're very much looking forward to your presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen and turn things over to you both to kick us off.
Thank you, Dan. I will jump in. If you're good with that, Maya? All good. Let me start this first to make sure you can see it. All right. Dan, we all good with the screen?
Looks great.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Dan, and to you, Jen Rose, for organizing this conversation. I have taken down so many notes already and am excited to share. So I'll start just by briefly bringing myself into the room. Sharita Love, as the founder and executive director of the Education Equity Center of St. Louis. Naming myself as a daughter of St. Louis, particularly St. Louis education. I've experienced it in all the ways. K through 8 education in St. Louis public schools. My mom moved us to myself and my younger sister to what was called then the DSSI program, or the transfer program, and so went to county schools through that program, Parkway in particular, for my high school experience, and then went to college in St. Louis, went to Harris Stowe, UMSL, Lindenwood, Fort St. Louis. So I've experienced it in all the ways, and experienced it in my shaping and socialization too, from a single mom who did not play about her daughters being high achieving. And I'm a middle kid, so take from that what you want. So that's that's some shaping, right, and socialization as well. And so all of that shaping and experience, as a classroom teacher, as a nonprofit leader, as an entrepreneur, like all the things that have brought me to this space and to this organization is what drives what you'll see and hear around this conversation on today. And so the Education Equity Center of St. Louis started as a program of another global nonprofit in 2017, and then we launched as a standalone organization in the fall of 2020. And most of our founding principles and the ways that we've gotten to this space were led by the call to action from the Ford through Ferguson Commission. One of the calls to action being for St. Louis to create an innovative education hub for educators to grapple with this idea of what it means to live into a fully equitable education system. And so that's a part of our big vision, to explore what it means to think about a fully equitable education system. And the ways that we work to achieve that mission is to build a coalition of anti-racist educators and students who lead the systemic change that we need to see that brought into reality. And so there's 4 ways that we center the work. Again, building the anti-racist teaching capacity of educators in St. Louis, elevating the autonomy of youth voice and power through anti-racist education capacity building, activating educators and students towards systems level leadership and change, and then acting as a regional partner, supporting accountability to education data. And so when we think about our conversation on today, some critical questions that drive our practice, capacity building, and systems change strategies are as follows. We think about how we ground ourselves, our work, in shared language and values and equity so that we're asking the right questions. We think about what the histories are, and we really center our work around historical analysis of what has shaped our current reality, and that's the collective, our current realities. And then who are the people behind the data and where are their voices? This notion of nothing without us, right? This notion of who are we engaging in relationship with, collaborating with to complete the work. Much to I believe what Amin and Senna both shared is that this notion of our connected systems, that when we think about what Amin and his work and some of the story that Amin brought in around housing and Senna around food insecurities, we center education, of course, in our work, but our work is not a standalone, right? Outside of the other systems. We're all interlocked and we need each other, right? The food system can't get come into this fully equitable reality and all the other systems are not. We all impact each other. And so centering the relationships that we have to even the importance of what Jenna brought in, how do we collaborate, not work just to fix our system and fix our sectors and our institutions, but what are the ways that we are across systems and institutions working in partnership with those who have similar vision. And so bringing in the wisdom and experience and scholarship of a few who guide some of the framing of our work, Ibram X. Kennedy talks about this importance of language, right? And again, when we talk about defining what it is we actually mean when we talk about equity, we talk about definitions that anchor our conversations as individuals within institutions, as institutions working towards equitable systems change. We need to have common framing and definitions for our work. And Ibram says that that definitions anchor us in principles. It's not a light point. If we don't do the basic work of defining the kind of people we want to be in language that's stable and consistent, we can't work towards stable and consistent goals. And so those stable and consistent goals, right, around us centering data, centering what the people say, we have to have some type of anchoring in common language and understanding. And the now ancestor Bell Hooks talks about throughout history how we have to be very explicit in what we're saying. The Education Equity Center is an explicit anti-racist organization. And so when we talk about language, we don't shy away from the realities that have shaped, right, the lived experiences of all of us in community. And so we know that there are attempts, right, and there have been attempts to soften language, right, and soften the ways that we think about and describe systemic inequity and racism. But Bell Hooks invites us to think about how impactful our words are and how we have to be intentional with that language that we use to better our understanding and shape the realities that we want to see. So what is all of this big work that we're doing around centering data and cultivating, right, equitable practices if we're not thinking about how that shapes the futures that we want to see. And so another way outside of us centering that shared understanding, again, those three questions around grounding in like common language, thinking about, the realities of and lived experiences of the people. Another way that we center data is around that fourth principle of acting as a regional partner accountable to what the data says. And a way that we do that is convening what we call simply a data roundtable. And so since we've started in 2020, we've worked for about a year to build relationship and partnership with what we call data-rich institutions in the region. So, we know schools and school districts collect data and they have data to say, particularly how our Black and Brown students are faring in education systems across the St. Louis region. And we have these data-rich institutions and organizations that are outside the four walls of our school systems who are also naming what the realities are and what's present. And so our hope and our goal is to convene as many of those institutions as possible, working with institutions like Ford through Ferguson, who do and have done many and released many reports around the state of education. STEM STL as a partner, Health Equity Works, SEACT at UMSL, Black Males in Education in St. Louis, We Power, SLU Prime Center, a number of institutions within the institution of Washington University. We've set the table, and it's taken about a year for us to, one, build relationship, talk about the ways that we hope to center the data that they've done and act as a partner to bridge what happens, again, within the four walls of our school system to what our community is thinking about and grappling with when it comes to education and equity, and how do we come together to tell a more rich story, to be more accountable to students, families, educators, and our community. And how do we track, right, what is happening? Normalizing that the data is the data. Like, these are the realities that we are all living in and grappling with. And how can we come together in a more communal way to say it's all of our job and all of our role and our responsibility to be accountable to this and what is happening here. That's my 10-minute buzzer, because I wanted to stay on time. I wanted to stay on time. So that's one of the ways that we've centered practice around what is happening, not just with our own work, our own convening, capacity building, and systems change work, but how does that live and look outside of our organization and across sectors, so that interconnectedness of our system is working towards, again, our vision of a more fully equitable education system. And so I'll just lift this up really quick. I'm not going to go through all of this, but when we think about data and we center data in our practice, thinking about ways that we acknowledge structural inequity is important. Ways that we acknowledge the histories of discrimination, stereotypes, biases, and racism are important. If there are those who are food insecure, there are those who are secure, right? And why? If there's systems of inequity in education, there are those who are equitable. Why? Right? What questions are we asking to ensure that the data is used for inclusion and not exclusion? That it is used to inform transformational change in our systems. And so with that, I will thank you. Again, we'll share slides, happy to share slides or information with Dan and Jen Rose for dissemination. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharita. That was great. And as I heard you list that amazing list of organizations who are thinking about these issues right here in St. Louis around education and equity, I'm sure that our members of our audience, whatever area you're working on, if it's health or housing or whatever, that you have a similar list of partners and organizations that come to mind that you might want to grapple with. I love this idea of a data roundtable, and I think that's along the lines of a data drill. How do you get the right people in the room? So thank you so much for that. And on the same topic, the last person we have is also a part of this conversation around education. So Maya Alcana is the evaluation director at the Institute for School Partnership. And Maya is a passionate advocate for families, students, and teachers, and brings a systems level approach to continuous quality improvement projects, specifically aimed at increasing equitable access to high quality STEM education for students and teachers. We were fortunate to connect with Maya after she attended one of our previous learning events and shared some of her thoughts along with her email in the post-event survey. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So 3 cheers for evaluation people going the extra mile in a survey and getting involved. I'm so glad you did. Please join me in welcoming Maya Alcana.
Hi, y'all. I wanted to get my screen up and hopefully you can see it. So like Jen Rose said, my name is Maya Alcana and I'm the evaluation director for the Institute for School Partnership at Washington University. And I'm really grateful to the previous speakers because I think that they're going to have covered a lot of the stuff that I was hoping would be covered to kind of set the ground rolling. So first off, ISP, the Institute for School Partnership, we are a part of Washington University here in St. Louis. We do a lot of different things. These are just kind of a little taste of some of the programs that we put on. I wanted to show you this because it's a lot of different things that we do, and we're a pretty small team. So we're not always able to do as much as we want with our data. And I think that we always need to kind of think about that and what it looks like to be a small team. I'm just going to talk about one of these programs with you all. MySci is a K-8 science program. We serve about 40% of the children between the ages of 5 and 14 in the metropolitan statistical area learn science with MySci, which is pretty cool, and we're very proud of it. MySci is a research practice partnership that is focused on increasing science instructional time at the elementary level and science instructional quality. And we have pretty robust program evaluation, I think, for our size at least. And so that works both at the educator level with teachers and the student level. We do surveys, we look at web analytics, we do focus groups, interviews, walkthroughs, lots of different things with our participants. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a story about how that works for us and how we look at data. First off, you can't do any of this. And I think Van Ross said, equity work is the doing. If you don't first really do the work of saying, what does it mean to center equity in this context? For our organization, it's not just about one program or the data or this or that. We try and keep frank, open, ongoing conversations intentionally across our organization. Our team actually participates with Ed Equity Center's equity roundtables, and which has been incredibly powerful for us. The members of the team who attend those will bring that back to the whole team. We as an organization read through with a fine-tooth comb Ford through Ferguson's Path Through Racial Equity, Still Separate, Still Unequal, and the State of Education Reform here in St. Louis. And we spent a few months having deep dives into what does this mean for us in our work. It also means that we have to really think intentionally about what data would we even need to collect? What would that even look like? How are we going to design our evaluation? What data is even available to us? And we have to be really honest with ourselves about our capacity and our goals and what's even possible. There's some great information about white supremacy culture. If you're not familiar, please Google that. But perfection is a big barrier to equity, right? And you really have to do that hard work of letting go what's perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It doesn't mean you don't do it, right? And so for us, it's really hard and necessary work we do that across our entire organization. Centering equity in our data for us looks like disaggregation. And we do a lot of things in order to make that possible. So first off, we pull publicly available data and we spend a lot of time just getting it into a place where we can understand it. For a small organization, just making sure your variable names match is sometimes a big undertaking. We think a lot about our survey design and distribution. We do voluntary surveys with teachers. We do voluntary interviewing. Almost everything, all of our evaluation is voluntary. So we need to be really clear about what's our response rate going to look like and how can we make sure that the data collection barrier is on us and not the people who we're serving. And then so kind of diving in deep into one little aspect of that, when we do teacher surveys, we disaggregate by whether the school serves a student demographic and not the teacher's demographics always, because we are thinking about those kids and trying to center our students, knowing how education works. And so we, coming through that work with Ford through Ferguson, work with that Equity Center, the way we generally do that is by looking at majority Black, majority white, and no majority schools, because that's what makes sense in a St. Louis context. So how do we engage with data as a team? We have data parties, and I'm going to tell you right now what Senna was saying about how a data party goes. It really rang true for me. We have to do these as part of our team meetings. It has to be pretty regular. It is something you have to do it multiple times in order to get into what even are we doing. I feel strongly using protocols matters, makes a huge difference. We use a data conversation protocol that follows this, ladder of inference type of idea. I don't necessarily think it matters what data protocol you're using, but using one can be so powerful. It forces people to slow down. And then also for us, this data conversation protocol mirrors the work that we're doing with participants, with educators in our programs. So it's part of that deeper learning cycle where we're doing the things that we want others to be doing, that I think has been really powerful for us. So small, tiny sliver of an example fast. We do this survey. It's part of a larger evaluation. We have interviews, focus groups, and then also there's more to this survey. But this was during the pandemic. And I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty happy with this. Look at that. We had 85% of our teachers saying that this curriculum is meeting the needs of their classroom. 85 saying that the resources made it easier to teach science during this was 2020, 2021. This is a really crappy year to be teaching anything, especially science, right? And we looked at this and we felt amazing about it. We did see some qualitative data about kind of the ease of use. Maybe some of the student-facing materials weren't quite ready for prime time. All of these things, though, that teachers were asking us about were really big deal projects. They weren't easy. They weren't things that we can just do. These are multiple years worth of work that we'd be looking at to start even addressing these issues. So I said, okay, well, what does that mean for us? Well, we disaggregated this data, and if you notice, there's a pretty big gap between what teachers are saying in majority white districts and what teachers are saying in majority Black districts. We went to those qualitative data. We say like, oh, if you would change anything, what would you change type of questions, right? And when we disaggregated our qualitative data, we saw an even starker divide where teachers who are teaching in our higher stressed districts, which tend to be majority Black districts, say things like, the slides, I couldn't use them in my class. They needed to be edited. And so I didn't know what to do. I could not use them. Whereas teachers in our majority white districts say things like, oh, I noticed the slides maybe needed to be edited, but I edited them. It was wonderful. Because we're talking about schools where you have 18 middle class, kids in a classroom who are here to learn science, and where you have 30 kids in a classroom where half of them are English language learners, and the teacher doesn't have time to even do those types of edits. We want to make this easy so that every teacher, every student can get that really high quality science education. And we're like, okay, well, this is on fire and you really need to do something about it. And that leads us to this idea of equity-driven decision-making. We can talk about equity all we want. We can think about this data all we want, and we kind of need to. But what do? We have to make decisions. And for us, that looks like a very resource-intensive multi-year curriculum redesign project that we embarked on. It's focusing on that user design, and that's in addition to the regularly scheduled updates and edits. We're adding icons, we're working with programmers on our web navigation, we're thinking about how we write instructions, we're thinking about how student-facing materials can be read by screen readers. What does differentiation look like in the classroom? And then we're also institutionalizing and formalizing that work by building into the curriculum itself these attending to equity sidebars so that it's educative and it's helping the teacher attend to equity as they're teaching the science. We're developing our own internal guidelines on how do we edit our curriculum and our work so that we don't, this wasn't a blip on the radar. We did that last year. We don't have to think about it anymore. And this is an ongoing process for us. We're not perfect, right? It's still something that we need to talk about over and over again. And it's the journey, right? It's not a destination. So those are some things that I wanted to share with you about our experience. Stop sharing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was great. It's just been really great listening to all of you and For those of you who may be interested in the tool that Maya shared or some of the other tools that speakers have shared, some folks asked in the chat, we will post some of these resources along with the slides and recording from the event. So be on the lookout for where to find those in our follow-up email coming to your inbox soon. And speaking of which, before we move to giving you all a chance to weigh in and ask some questions, I want to do one more humble plug for our survey. So it's a really short survey. It is multiple choice questions. Mostly it takes just a couple of minutes to fill out. And I have just here a snapshot of the kinds of questions in there. So super easy if you want to advance that slide. And they really help inform the approach of our events though. So I really appreciate you, those of you taking the time to let us know what you think. And some of the feedback that we've gotten so far has led us to try some things a little bit different today. For example, well, we invited Maya because we met her from one of the open-ended questions. You don't have to fill that out, but we're so glad that she did. And we were able to come into conversation with some of the things that she was grappling with. And ultimately, she was a good fit for this event. So that was really helpful. Also, we see that people really want time and opportunity to connect with one another and presenters. Some people, though, say they need to stay on mute or off camera, whereas other people really want to jump in and engage. So we have mixed response about breakouts, but definitely people want to know how to be able to connect. So we're going to try something a little bit different today, which Dan will talk you through in just a minute, to try to give you that space to connect with one another and share some of your stories without anybody feeling put on the spot. So I'll just turn things over to Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen Rose. Thank you again to our amazing presenters. So as per the usual, in addition to our plugs for the evaluation, we encourage folks to bring these conversations and these thought processes that you're having back to your organization and to your colleagues. We'd also encourage you to share your thoughts and ideas with us, not only through the brief post-event survey, but you can also reach out directly. Jen Rose has made herself incredibly available to friends and colleagues interested in learning and grappling collectively in the space. Of course, our amazing partners at the St. Louis Regional Data Alliance here in the house today, Paul Sorensen and colleagues. So we encourage folks to participate actively in the Regional Data Alliance. They have their quarterly member meeting coming up, if I recall correctly. So still plenty of time to get in on that if you're interested. And then again, to please sign up and join us at our next event in June, sharing data, sharing power, tools, and tensions in collective data efforts. So with that, we are looking forward to continuing the conversation. We'll offer 2 breakout rooms with our presenters and an opportunity to connect and share with social sector colleagues. Imagining some folks are going to have to drop off, totally fine, we understand. And for the folks who are interested in going a little deeper and sharing some space with Amin, Sana, Shrita, and Maya, you are so very much welcomed, whether that's to participate actively or, again, to Jen Rose's great point, feel free just to be a fly on the wall, especially if you're driving, please be a fly on the wall. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone next time. So we'll open up these breakout rooms and see folks back. Jen Rose, did you want to join one of the 2 rooms in particular? And folks, if you're still with us, feel free to join the breakout. Feel free to hang back. If you have any questions that I can help to address, come off mute, say hello, and we'll see you next time.
How do you join the breakout rooms?
Let me see if I can add you into it. It should have had a pop-up on your screen.
Well, I see 4 people here. Would you just click one of the 4 people or something?
Yeah, give me 1 second to check and see if I can get you in there. Okay, perfect. James, I'll get you in one of the breakout rooms right now. Thanks so much. Hey, Adam, how's it going? We are in breakout rooms right now. We just went over there. You are welcome to join or whatever is best for you.